The first thing we're going to touch on when we're talking about modern Central America and the Caribbean is the cultures that we see in these areas. And there are very many cultures within the area. But just to name a few of them, West African is very big culture there. They also have some native cultures that are still hanging on, as well as French, Danish, British, and Spanish, all of these European cultures that are coming in, and they have mixed together to make pretty diverse societies all the way across Central America and the Caribbean. Now, the biggest language that's spoken throughout this region is Spanish. Spanish is the main language. It's not that everybody in Central America and the Caribbean speak it, but most people do. The other thing to kind of point out is the Caribbean culture part. The Caribbean culture has some influence from the Spanish, but most of the influence comes from West African culture because most of the people are of African descent. They came over, brought over as slaves, and then were kind of left behind there when the entire slavery thing ended. Okay, so as far as religion goes in this area, most of the people are Roman Catholic. About 90% of the people are Roman Catholic, but there are many other religions that show up in this area. And so a lot of the traditions are mixed in with some of the celebrations that they have. And so you can see kind of this Catholic roots along with some other African cultural aspects. And so um, the one of them is Carnival. Carnival shows both of these sides, and Carnival is a religious festival observed by the Roman Catholics. Okay, and it is to celebrate the end of Lent, and Lent is a Catholic religious time, and during Lent you're asked to sacrifice something, to give up something and not eat it, okay, or not ingest it, not take it in. You're giving up something. It's a lot like fasting in Islam, but instead of not taking in everything, you're picking one thing that you won't take in at that time. And so anyways, at the end, they have a big celebration, and this celebration that occurs throughout this region and in Brazil has these huge parades that show their African culture. And so you see a lot of things that are very West African, like the bright costumes that they wear, as well as the music. Their music, they do a lot of calypso music, which uses the steel drum and makes an interesting sound, as well as West African traditional styles of dancing. There's some other religions as well that mix some of these ideas of Roman Catholicism and other religions, and so we'll talk about those now. Santeria is the first one I want to talk about, and Santeria is a mixture of Catholic and West African. A West African religion named Yoruba, and it's mixed up, and it's seen mostly in Cuba. But what they talk about the saints and all that kind of stuff, just like Roman Catholics. However, the god that they see is a god named Chango, which is from their old religion, and it's a spirit that is from this ancient African religion. And so it is Chango is the god of music, drumming, dancing, fire, lightning, thunder, and war. And so you can see that Chango was an important god in their old religion, and so now they see that as the singular god within their Catholic faith. So that's just one example. Another example is voodoo, and voodoo is all about their main god in voodoo, which is seen in Haiti, is named Bandier. But Bandier is completely and totally unreachable. So you can't get a hold of them, you can't talk to them, whatever. There's kind of these middlemen, these spirits called the Loa, and so voodoo is about your relationships with the Loa, and so the Loa can go out and do things and interact with humans in the world for you or with you or something like that, but they're also the ones that get the messages to this god that's completely unreachable. And so this idea of like voodoo dolls and things like that are shown right here, is the idea that the Loa, if you take a pin and prick this voodoo doll, then it will have an effect on the physical body of the person that you have made the doll for. And so the spirits will actually attack that person in the same way that the pin pricks them. Okay, so now looking at the other ones, Rastafarianism, Hinduism, Islam, Protestant. We know a lot about Hinduism, Islam, and Protestant, but Rastafarianism is all about it's an Ethiopian religion, and it's basically the idea that this former emperor of Ethiopia, who's not around anymore, is divine, is a god. Okay, and so they treat that person like the god. And Rastafarianism has some interesting aspects of it. One of it is they encourage the use of marijuana to heighten the religious experience, and also they're against owning physical things, and so you're asked to give up a lot of your property, a lot of the things that you own if you're Rastafarian. Okay, now we look at the natives in the region. Most of the natives that are around are actually mestizos, and mestizos are people that have ancestry that are both Spanish and native. So if you have a native mom and a Spanish dad, you are a mestizo, as well as the other way around. If one of your parents is one and one of your parents is the other, you're mestizo. And this is the largest ethnic group in Central America. So this mixed ethnicity is the most prominent one in the Central America region. Remember, in the Caribbean, it's mostly West African people. But in Guatemala, the largest group is actually the Mayan natives. Okay, and so throughout Guatemala, you hear people speaking both their language, Maya, and Spanish, which they learn in school because they need to be able to communicate with the other people. And they also mix their traditional religions, their Mayan religions, with Catholicism, and so they mix the ideas of the saints with Mayan gods, having multiple gods and things like that. Okay, and they also wear clothing that looks like this right here. It's a traditional clothing. That's one of their skills, is to be able to weave and do a really good job of that. And so they dye the fabric and they weave it in really nice, and it's nice, colorful clothing. Within the region, there's some major issues with poverty happening right now, and that's causing a diaspora. A diaspora is a spread of people coming out of that place and going to a whole bunch of different other places. So a diaspora means that everyone is leaving a centralized place and going to different places all around the world often. Okay, and so these people are in this diaspora, moving from their home country to different places. And what they're trying to do is find work, because there's not enough work and good quality work on the islands and small countries. And then what they do is they'll go to, like, let's say the US and find some work, and then they'll send remittances. And remittances is kind of a fancy word for sending money back home to support your families. And so if anybody that you know wires money back to family members in Africa or back to family members wherever, that is called sending remittances. And so there has, been a diaspora if people all leave one place, and then remittances are sent if they're sending money back to help out the people that are still in their country. Food also is pretty diverse, and there's some cultural diffusion going out from that area. Okay, some of the foods that are really prominent and were created there in this region are burritos, which you all know what those are, and then Cuban sandwiches. And this is a Cuban sandwich. It's essentially pulled pork and ham and cheese and mustard and pickles, and so it's this sandwich that has become very, very popular in the United States as well. Also, they have a lot of different music, which we'll check out some of it in class. But in Puerto Rico, it's really salsa music is extremely popular, which is also popular in America now. It's a big thing that you dance to. In the Dominican Republic, you see a lot of merengue, and then in Jamaica, you hear a lot of reggae. And so instead of me describing these, we'll listen to some of it in class. So the government is changing very often in many of these countries, and a lot of it is due to migration, people moving around, as well as natural disasters. However, in Central America, most of the governments are like the one in the United States. Most of them are presidential democracies, meaning the head of the government is a president, not a prime minister or something like that. So they're mostly modeled after the United States. In the Caribbean, it's a little bit different. In the Caribbean, they're democracies with a parliamentary system. So that's like Canada that we talked about. So they have a prime minister that's picked from their parliament. So Central America, kind of like the US, the Caribbean, kind of more like Canada. Most of the countries, like Mexico, require their citizens to vote. And so they say you have to vote if you are a citizen of this country. It's in their laws. The most stable of all the governments that has changed the least is Costa Rica. It's been the same since 1899, and they've been electing rulers. And they've had the least amount of change, and that least amount of change has allowed them to become a more stable and richer nation than the other countries. In the poorer countries, people are really unhappy. Because these are poorer countries, people are unhappy that things are not getting better. And so they are saying that there is just a serious lack of the government helping them out. And so a lack of social services, no healthcare, no education, they're not getting all the things that people in other countries are getting. So the citizens are starting to demand change. And these demands for change could be from protests all the way up to, anger and violence and, civil war. Okay, and so we'll look at a little bit of that. There's been military takeovers really, really common in the region. One example is in Guatemala. There is a civil war, or there was a civil war in Guatemala that made democracy impossible because it was constant fighting up until 1996 when the fighting ceased. And, has it really stopped? Has it completely stopped? Yeah, I mean, it has, but there's still bitterness in place because it's so fresh after that war. In Haiti in 1994, there was a violent uprising and 20,000 United States troops went in to end this, to try and end the violent uprising so that it could get back under control, because America had a business interest there. They had a lot of people that had a lot of money in there, so they needed to go in and stop this from happening. And the United Nations actually still has a peacekeeping force, still has troops there to keep the peace. And they're trying to help out and help Haiti as much as possible. But with these two sides that want to fight each other, it's very difficult to stop that from happening. Okay, so most of the countries did get rid of their dictatorships, but there are some that didn't. One of them that is an example is Cuba. And so we'll talk about Cuba now because it's a little different than the other countries. They still have a dictatorship. Their dictatorship was started actually by Fidel Castro in 1959. And from 1959 to 2008, he was the dictator of Cuba under the guise of communism. And so basically saying, I'm going to be a dictator and we are going to live together and share all our money and do all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to make sure that that happens. And so that happened up until 2008, and then he had an illness, and so he passed on it was earlier than 2008, but a few years before he died, he passed on the leadership to his brother Raul Castro, and Raul Castro was the leader from 2008 to present. Now Fidel Castro ended up dying, and now Raul Castro is very old too, and so he's giving up his power, and there's an election coming to see who the next person will be, which could completely change how the country works, but we'll see. Anyways, it's the socialist. Cuba is a socialist republic, so it's a command economy, and the republic part means they do vote, but the issue is, the only party is the Communist Party, and so you get to vote between Communist Party and Communist Party. There's really no options, and so you don't get to pick the leader, but you do get to vote for your National Assembly people. They can vote, but they're mostly unfair because there's most of the time, only one single option to vote for. It's like going in to vote and you only have one box that you can check. It's not really voting then. And this does lead to less freedom. So they do have less freedom, but they also have some perks. There's some good parts to having this socialist economy. And a lot of that is that college and healthcare are basically free for you your entire life because it's a socialist republic. However, because they're free, you don't really see a whole lot of the most educated people becoming doctors and working in the colleges, and so the quality is generally lower than in a place where it costs money, like the United States of America. So how do we make improvements in the area? Okay, well, what the first thing you need to do is find leaders who want to make a change and want to make a positive change. And it's extremely important that you find somebody who actually wants to change and doesn't just want to keep it going and gain more and more power. And so, what you need to do is they want to increase capital investment. Capital investment means people putting money into businesses in the area, because if you grow the businesses, it gets more jobs for people and the entire economy grows. And so they want people to invest in factories and technology, and what that will do is lead to economic growth because it'll make them better in every type of their economy. If you have a machine that it works twice as fast, you can make twice as much product and make more money for that. Okay. And so the other thing that they need to do is they need to improve human capital in the area. So capital investment as well as human capital investment, which is to train and educate people so that they become more productive, so that now not only the machines are better, but the people are better at doing their job as well. And that will improve the economies. So with free trade, we've only talked about North America, so we've only really talked about NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. But there are other countries, and these countries also have agreements to get rid of the government restrictions on trade with each other, to get rid of tariffs and quotas and things like that. And a couple of them that I'll point out are CARICOM and CAFTA-DR. Okay, and so CARICOM is the Caribbean community, and most of this is just the island countries. And so the ones that are out in the Caribbean Sea are the ones that are in CARICOM, whereas CAFTA-DR is Central America, those 7 countries, also Dominican Republic, which is out in the Caribbean, and the United States. And so it's important to kind of know which countries belong to which free trade agreements, because those type of questions could come up on a quiz, like what free trade agreement would Haiti be a part of? And that would be CARICOM, because it's a Caribbean nation that's not the Dominican Republic. All right, so anyways, as we know, the benefits of free trade are that it's encouraging foreign companies to come in. And when you encourage foreign companies to come in and invest and put factories there and things like that, then that's going to make some jobs. And so that's a good thing because it makes jobs for your citizens. They don't have to leave and send money back. The bad part, the drawbacks, are first off, it helps the richer nations more, because the richer nations are the ones who have people that are owners of the companies, and so they make all the money, and the workers, just the people that are working in the factory or whatever, are the people that are actually from your own country. And so if you're in Central America, the Central American people might be getting like $10 an hour, whereas the person from America could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, being the CEO, being the higher up people in the company. And so it's it's helping the richer nations more. There's low wages for the people that live there. And the other thing that's happening is that it's not protecting the environment. And so these factories are trying to make money. And so whatever they have to do, they don't care about the environment mostly. And so they just do whatever is the cheapest way of getting rid of waste or something like that, whether it's dumping it into the river or anything. Okay. And so if it's a farm, especially some of these farms that are owned by these people, they'll use heavy amounts of pesticides and fertilizers and not really care what it's doing to the local environment, because the owners don't even live in that local environment. So we've already talked about some of the problems of farming, but I'll rehash them here. Some of the problems are, number one, the big farms are not even owned by people in the country. They're owned by people in other countries like America. And so the farmers don't even own the food. They just go out there and work for whatever period of time, and then they get paid for that. So the food's not even really theirs. They're not making money based off how much they make or anything like that. The other problem is nobody is really caring about the environment because the people that own the farm are living elsewhere. So they're happy to use lots of pesticides and fertilizers, and the governments are generally not making laws that are stopping this from happening. In Guatemala, there's been some land reform laws. Okay, it's a poorer country, and so kind of like Benito Juarez did, they have taken land from powerful landowners, rich people that have a lot of land, and they split it up and gave it to poor farmers to try and get it so that each person was kind of supporting themselves and at least making enough that they could survive. Um, the other thing that has been happening in Guatemala and in some of these countries is called microcredit. Microcredit's pretty interesting. Microcredit is very small loans for small farmers to get started. So it literally might be, I have a garden patch and I need $50 to buy seeds for my tomato farm or whatever it is. Okay, and so people will say, okay, I'll borrow you $50 and you can pay me back, 55. I'll get 10% of the money back and we're all good. Well, a lot of these people couldn't get loans from banks, couldn't get big loans from banks because they don't have the credit to do it, right? And so the banks wouldn't trust them, but it's easy to trust someone with a small loan because they're more likely to pay back that $50 because it's so small, and as soon as they make the money, and you're more likely to also, if they default, if they don't give it back, well, you only lost $50, so the risk is a lot lower for the lender. But with microcredit, it's kind of interesting because the farmers are actually more likely to pay back those small bills than they are the really, really huge ones that they have to pay back over the course of many, many years. Another trend in the area is called ecotourism. Ecotourism is tourism that's main focus is on the environment, and you don't want to mess anything up. You don't want to change the environment, you just want to enjoy it. And so most of it's not done on cars and buses and things like that. It's mostly on hiking or on horseback. And you sleep in kind of simple huts that don't hurt the environment, not air conditioned and all that kind of stuff. And also eat local foods. You're not shipping in foods or using pesticides and fertilizers to create large amounts of food for big resorts and things like that. And so the question is, will this hurt the native culture? Well, what we're finding is it actually doesn't hurt the native culture because a lot of the people that are running these small ecotourist places are natives. And so what is happening is, like in the Cunayala Reserve, which is in Panama, the natives plan it and manage the program. And so what they get to actually do is not only make money getting people to have an environmentally friendly vacation, but they actually get to share and spread their culture to other people. So it actually helps their culture to blossom instead of making their culture go away like the big resorts do in the area.